created. This is a program where we bring you information with respect to what is happening in St Kitts and Nevis in the public sector, in the government. And so we feature notable persons within the government and so we feature notable persons within the government who can give a report of what is happening in their departments and in their ministries. It's all a part of the good governance and transparency agenda of the government. Today we are going to be having a discussion on International Women's Day and the St Kitts and Nevis National Gender Equality Policy and Action Plan. And this is a discussion that is going on with the Department of Gender Affairs, and I have people here from Gender Affairs, officials from the Department of Gender Affairs, and invited persons as well who are going to be having this discussion this afternoon. I would begin with Professor June Gishard Pine, OBE, BPW, and she will be speaking to us about the impact of COVID-19 on women's lives. And we are going to hear much more about that. There's a lot written about it, there's a lot that has been noted about it, and so on. So welcome, Professor.
Welcome. Hello.
I also have with me Mrs. Sharon Warner, who was here not too long ago, and she is the Executive Officer in the Department of Gender Affairs. She will give us an overview of the gender policy. Mrs. Warner, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
And I have our veteran, Mrs. Celia Christopher, who has been here multiple times, and she's the Director in the Department of Gender Affairs. Mrs. Christopher, welcome.
Happy to be here.
Right. Now, March 8th, every year, is designated by the United Nations as a global recognition of women, what we call International Women's Day. Hasn't this now become monotonous? The issues more or less are the same from year to year. Are you flagging a dead horse? Why is it so important to continue to celebrate this day? What is hoped to be achieved? And what activities have been planned by the Department of Gender Affairs to celebrate this day? Mrs. Christopher.
Well, it might seem to some folks that we are flagging a dead horse, but it is very important to highlight the contribution of women, because women's voices need to be heard. And with that said, let me just explain to you or give you some information. I am happy to be able to share with you some information about the observation of International Women's Day. The occasion of International Women's Day is observed globally on the 8th of March, as you have said before, with various events on that day and throughout the month to mark the economic, political, and social achievement of women. The theme for International Women's Day 2021 is Women in Leadership, Achieving an Equal Future in a COVID-19 World. So most of our discussion is going to be centralized around the COVID response and the pandemic. The theme celebrates the remarkable effort by women and girls globally in shaping a more equal future and recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Meanwhile, the campaign theme, #Chose to Challenge, speaks to a challenging world becoming a more alert world. It focuses on individuals, as we are all responsible for our own thoughts and actions. The theme is particularly important as it focuses on COVID-19 in a world that has been forced to face health, economic, and social lockdown. It is also timely as it impacts primarily on women's lives. For example, women stand at the front line of the COVID-19 crisis as healthcare workers, caregivers, innovators, community organizers, and leaders in combating the pandemic. Women's lives have also been impacted significantly through the loss of livelihood from the tourism and service industry sectors, both of which are predominantly female, as well as an increased caregiving responsibility following the closure of schools and daycare facilities. Confinement to the home also saw an increase in domestic violence, as individuals who had problems with relationships were forced to spend more time together. The department believes that women must be recognized for their contributions, generosity, and courage, whether it be through advocating for change through their impact and influences as role models in the community, caring for children, or promoting the legal rights of women. We can all make positive gains towards women equality through our collective actions. In St Kitts and Nevis, International Women's Day is set aside to celebrate the tremendous strengths, resilience, and capacities of women. Beginning this year's activities, including a church service on Sunday, the 7th of March at 10 a.m. at the Church of God of Prophecy in Keon. The minute followed by the minister's statement on March 8 to mark International Women's Day. That is followed by the annual International Women's Day Award ceremony on Monday 8 March at the Kuna Caribbean Center. Women's contribution in the areas of governance and democracy, gender-based violence, community service, partnership, medicine, and education will be awarded. The airing of a 4-part docuseries, The Impact of COVID-19 on Women's Lives, in collaboration with business and professional women. Collaboration with the media, in particular radio stations, featuring statements by influential women on various topics throughout the month of March, starting on March 8 to March 31st, 2021. Recognition of workers on the industrial estate, employees on the industrial estate, and paying tribute to those employees who have made outstanding contribution to the industrial sector. The event will be held at the Moravian Church, Victoria Road. Then finally we have the launch of the Women Pioneer Gallery from 8 to 31st March at the Ministry of Social Development and Gender Affairs, Victoria Road, from 8 to 3 a.m. Finally, the Department of Gender Affairs thank all of our partners, supporters, and the general public as we celebrate our women leaders, their achievements, and the importance of their work in our society during this time. We want to encourage women to continue the good work that they have been doing as advocates and champions of change in helping to create a more gender-balanced world. So we have quite a lot of activities this year. You would think we are focusing on the COVID response, of course, but as you know, this year we went out of our way to build a lot of partnership and collaboration in order to highlight the work of women in the country and what we are doing with regards to the pandemic.
Right, and so therefore it is extremely important every year to highlight what women do, their successes, but not only their successes, but of course their challenges as well, because there are many challenges that women face in today's society, hardships, and some of that we will look at, and that is why we have Professor Gishard Pine, who is here. Now, Professor, COVID-19 has laid bare many issues of gender equality. Although the virus doesn't discriminate in terms of gender, its impact on women has been devastating, much more than it has been on men. What is mainly responsible for this? I know we can speak about the economic impact on women. We can speak about the health impact on women. We can speak about unpaid care work. We can speak about gender-based violence. And we can speak about the impacts in terms of humanitarian and fragile settings and on human rights.
What's responsible for that is really across the globe. Most societies are structured so that they are unequal. The systems are unequal. in relation to the access they give to women and to men, or males and to females. And that's really the underpinnings of the inequalities that have manifest as a result of COVID-19 also.
Right. Now, how specifically, Professor, have women been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic? What really should be done to help them to recover? And what gender gaps need to be closed?
Well, I'm here to talk about the docu-series itself that BPW St Kitts produced. What I can say is that much of what happened in St Kitts and Nevis happened across the whole region, because of our dependence on tourism, for example, and because women's roles are integral to the tourism industry across the Caribbean region. So what can be done? What we're trying to do is raise awareness of all of those issues, because we can feel that we're an island and that the troubles that we are having are unique to ourselves. And until we have these sorts of discussions and we create a dialogue and make people aware that actually these are familiar issues for all women, many women won't recognize that actually these are issues that we can pull together, become more aware of, and work together. Because I think we're very creative and talented, actually, the way we can improvise and work out solutions. And if we can pool all of that creativity, we'll find a whole raft of solutions that perhaps we wouldn't find if we just remained isolated and alone. So I think that in terms of what can be done, is to continue to raise awareness, continue to create a dialogue across womankind in the Federation. Beyond that, I'm not really going to say what should happen beyond St Kitts and Nevis, but those main things, being aware of the sisterhood, how we can support one another, how we can understand each other's pain, and we can think together about the creativity that exists beyond our job roles, beyond our work, our existence as mothers and daughters and so on. There's so much talent that we have amongst us as sisters, that we really need to draw those out in situations like this where we're in crises, and we have to think about what are our inner skills and what's the potential that's there for us to think about the skills that are perhaps subdued because of our roles that we have to do in employment or in our work in our home life and so on and so forth. So I think that's really the important things we should learn from COVID-19.
Right, and a number of women, and you touched on it, work as domestic workers. Mm-hmm. They work in homes, in domestic situations. They're frontline workers, as Mrs. Christopher touched on. They work in hotels, where if they're waiters or they attend to rooms and that sort of a thing. They work in restaurants and daycare centers, nurseries. Some of them are nurses. They work in factories and so on. And these are some of the places that have been affected by all these lockdowns, because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so therefore there has been serious economic impact, for example, on women. Mm-hmm. We know that some governments across the region and across the world, you talk about stimulus packages, mm-hmm. and that sort of a thing. But specifically, what is in those stimulus packages really for women? Specifically for women, because they have been impacted, worse economically, mm-hmm. than any other gender, really. Not because the pandemic, the COVID-19 is targeting them, but because of the areas in which they work. The tourism industry, mm-hmm. which you mentioned, has been severely impacted. And a lot of women work within the tourism industry. Mm-hmm. The hospitality sector, mm-hmm. they work in the hospitality sector. For example, here in St Kitts and Nevis and all across the Caribbean, you find that women are the ones who are heading households. Mm-hmm. The homes are matrifocal,
yes,
led by women. And so therefore the economic impact has been great. How will women recover?
How will women recover?
You spoke about the creativity and so on. Of course, some people, some were forced to get into little making of this and making of that. Some people have gone into the food business and making
Being
masks.
very
And
creative.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I think that's quite a big question. As I said, I'm here representing BPW St Kitts to talk about the docu-series. But in terms of my ideas about how can they recover, it's got to be multi-layered. There's got to be from the top down all the way through to the grassroots. So I don't think it's a simple answer, and I think what we do as humans is we think about simple answers to complex problems. So there's no simple answer to how women will recover. It's a very complex matrix of factors that will make the difference. What we did as BPW St Kitts was to highlight the challenges, as I say, for women to feel that sense of support, that there are women around them that understand what the trials and tribulations are for them during this current time, and to throw them a line, if you like, to hold on to, so that they could actually look forward to survive and be as buoyant as possible. But in terms of the solution, I think it's very complicated. There's no simple answer to how they will recover. It will take every layer of society to ensure that will happen.
Yes, and so the support network really has to be there for women.
Now, what I can say about that, Mr. Williams, is that data from the Department the Department of Labor has shown us how serious the impact is on women. And having that data, one of the ways, in my mind, to address it is to have the key ministries work together to assist the women that are impacted by the COVID. We can work with the Ministry of Health, we can work with the Ministry of Consumer Affairs, we can work with the Ministry of Labor, our own ministry, and we can all get together and see how we can help them, because they are also showing up in our data from the NHR, women who are not working and stuff like that. So that is one way that we can come together and see, even though there has been some form of stimulus package, we can't just give that one package. We have to continue working with them until they have gainful employment.
Yes, because then people are, because of the pandemic, have been shoved more into needs and people more into poverty and so on. Mm-hmm. And if this is not really addressed, then it simply means, you mentioned people will be creative and so on, but this might breed other problems within the society. Maybe women might be pushed more into being abused by men, for example, because they want money and they don't have to look after their families and so on. It may drive them into certain sectors that make them even more vulnerable, certain areas, to abuse and that sort of a thing. People preying on certain vulnerabilities and that.
Well, we have seen an increase in the issue of domestic violence, and that is a direct spin-off from unemployment and other factors. And it not only affect the woman herself, it also affects the children. Mm-hmm. So you have a number of factors that has impacted the family greatly, because now you also have to look for counseling services, you have to look for mediation services, and you have to bring to bear all of these services to wrap around these families in order to address the issues that are coming out.
Yes, because in 2020, the United Nations, Mrs. Christopher, dedicate the entity which is really dedicated to gender equality and the empowerment of women, launched the Shadow Pandemic Public Awareness Campaign. And basically the Shadow Pandemic Public Awareness Campaign focuses on the global increase in domestic violence amid the COVID-19 health crisis. And they call it the Shadow Pandemic. It has always been there, the domestic violence, but it has been increased because of the COVID-19, women having to stay at home, the lockdowns, mm-hmm. women not employed, and so on.
And you see, this brings us into the area of unpaid work. Now, it may seem simple that people might think, oh, she's at home, and, as they would like to ascribe all sorts of role to women. But you just can't ascribe those roles. She's at home, but she has so many things to take care of. I mean, if you were supposed to put a value and time and payment of the work that women do in the home, they would have been taken care of during this pandemic. But that is something again that we have to pay close attention to. And I hope that the next census coming up, that there will somewhere in that census questionnaire that they address that issue, women and unpaid work. Because all over the world now, they're paying attention to it. They're looking at what is happening.
Right. And so therefore, you know, it is really a scourge. This gender-based violence is really a scourge on women and a scourge on the society as a whole. It is really a scourge. And
the whole idea of the gender-based violence, there are a set of drivers, and I think to my mind, the issue of poverty is a really, really big driver in this whole issue of domestic violence.
The issue of what?
Poverty.
Poverty.
Yes.
Because then it
facilitating gender equality and empowerment. It's a part of the Sustainable Development Goals. This will include the establishment of public oversight bodies and ministerial cooperation structures. The policy will contain guidance towards the implementation of gender-based and sensitive strategies both in the public and private sector in an effort to protect the human rights of citizens and residents. This would therefore serve to ensure that the rights and interests of men and women are at the core of the country's development agenda, which is envisaged to contribute significantly to positive, life-changing, measurable outcomes in the lives of citizens. The Department of Gender Affairs is committed to ensuring that both males and females are equal partners in shaping the economical, educational, political, cultural and spiritual development of the Federation of St Kitts and Nevis. The Department remains steadfast in its commitment towards fostering an environment that enables women and men to enjoy their full rights as equal partners in contributing to the overall development of the Federation. By way of background, the gender policy is a 2-year project. Phase 1 of the project was successfully completed in December 2019 and comprised of widespread consultations, public awareness and advocacy activities, which included the collection of qualitative stakeholder data through discussions, focus groups and roundtable meetings, which formed a significant component of the process. The department has now entered the second and final phase of the Gender Policy and Action Plan, which will run until December 2021. So the actual Gender Policy and Action Plan is intended to guide the transformation process towards gender equality and equity for all citizens and residents of the Federation.
right. No, I think you need to define two terms I heard a while ago. One is equality and the other is equity. Because both of us, we're equal really in terms of our education, but there is no equity.
Right. Okay. So, as you say, they are different terms, and it's quite important to define them separately. Equality, basically, is it's giving everyone the same tools and resources at the same time, making no distinction. But as has been mentioned earlier, society is unequal, so that has to be recognised. And in order to achieve equality, equity must be applied. So equity ensures that fair access for all based on their needs. So we know men and women are different and they have different needs, so we have to address those needs.
Yes.
And in some instances, interventions need to be made in order to give both men and women equal access to the resources of the country.
Mm-hmm.
For example, in the case of women, the provision of maybe daycare facilities for children will allow them to enter into the workforce. So that will give them access to be able to participate in working life within the society.
Mhm. Okay. Now, Professor Gishard Pine, tell us a little bit more about the docu-series.
Okay.
How are you going to go about, putting this documentary together? Who will be your target persons in the society? Are you going to have a wide cross-section of women, because you're basically dealing with the impact on women, and so on, so we can really get a comprehensive documentary in terms of the impact of the pandemic on women's lives?
Okay, the docu-series has already been produced. And
Oh,
it's
it has?
Yes, it's actually being broadcast at the moment on ZIZ TV on a weekly basis.
Oh, that tells you how much I tune in. Yes.
So that's one way that we're going to disseminate the information. But I represent the Training and Development Committee of the Business and Professional Women Club of St Kitts.
Right.
That's what I do. And when we got together, my tenure started in May 2020. When we got together, we realized that we were handcuffed in a way because of COVID. We could no longer provide training that was face-to-face in the way that we were used to. So, like I said earlier, we had to be creative. We have to think, how do we reach a similar or a higher number of people with the activities that we do? And what came out of that was we had a discussion about lots anecdotal information, really. The different things we knew as women that were here, that were existing within the COVID pandemic. How was it affecting women specifically? And we came up with 6 areas. We came up with domestic violence, which we've touched on. We came up on physical and mental health challenges. We came across the work and home life balance that would be completely transformed for the working mother in particular. We came across the issue of loneliness and support. So for women who relied on community support and family support with the lockdowns, they were completely isolated. They couldn't just send their child to auntie or to the woman next door. They were there hemmed in with these children. So we talked about those issues too. And we talked about finances, of course, because not everybody has been brought up with this mentality that you must save a penny out of every, I'm from the UK, save a cent out of every dollar. So when the pandemic hit, took us all by surprise, and then we looked at our bank balances and thought, wow, we haven't got enough to survive. That's where the stimulus package came in. But then, of course, with any budgeting, we know that what has to come in has to equal what has to go out for us to survive. And that certainly wasn't happening for many women, even the ones for us who still had a job. So we wanted to focus on those issues. So I've noticed, for example, in episode 2, it's on work and home life balance. Now, as I was driving around with a filmmaker around the island, we noticed there was a sign on the road saying "Men at Work." Okay, and that kind of tells you talk about how do we become more aware. Most of us wouldn't notice. There's a sign that says "Men at Work," but it's part of my consciousness as a woman, and it underlines that is how the society is set up, to bring attention to the fact that men are at work. Your motif here, working for you, has a man digging, which symbolizes men at work.
Yes.
There's no sense that women are also working. There's no kind of visual image that tells women you're contributing to the society. We notice you. We know that you're here. We know that you're part of the fabric of what we're doing. So it's things like that, really. We wanted to reach people by producing something that raised their awareness, because we couldn't do a course, we couldn't do a workshop where we invited people, so we had to use that opportunity to give a message to women to say we're here and we're listening and we're watching and we understand what's happening for you. So those 6 areas actually, we used a range of media. The finances, we have the great Dawn Williams, who's well known across the island and has a brilliant history as being one of our top banking managers in St Kitts and Nevis. She did a lesson on financial planning and creating wealth. So we did that purely on finances. Then we did another session on domestic violence, which we've talked about already, because in November every year, the whole world recognises that women are still being physically abused and violated by men in huge numbers. So that's what we did in November. And then the video log, it was intended to be just some photo slides and a few captions, but actually it manifested into a TV series. Sorry, I shouldn't say a TV series. It is now on TV, but it manifested into a documentary. And each episode is about 12 to 18 minutes long. The first episode is on physical health and well-being. So we approached professional doctors on the island. I spent some time at Windsor University, and we managed to attract some final year students to come and talk about what are they understanding from their work in community medicine, what is happening to women. So they were able to make a contribution. We had Zara Jacobs, who is one of our top therapeutic counsellors, and she came to talk about what she's noticing, but also to give advice and guidance on how women can address those issues. And then we had Gwen Carter, who's a lifestyle coach, and she talked about nutrition. She talked about lifestyle, how things we can do or not do can benefit us in a time when the finances are reduced. And then we had Sonia Edwards, who's a human resource professional, and she came and made a contribution also on all these different issues. And so their interviews were arranged across 4 episodes. And I think ZIZ are now on they just broadcast a 3rd episode, and the 3rd episode is due the series is due to finish on the 15th of March. It goes out on Mondays at 7:40 after the evening news. So that's basically what the docu-series has been about. The first episode was mental, physical and health and well-being. The second was on work and home life balance, because as Celia said, there were women working at home. If they were fortunate enough to have a job, they had to work and look after the child and teach the child. So they had 3 things.
So it is the additional strain.
Yeah,
That's right. And some of them didn't have a man in the house to share that with. So if we don't talk about these issues, we don't even compute that this is happening in many, many households across the Federation. These women are there trying to manage everything on their own in isolation, and in literal isolation, not like in the normal course of events they could call on auntie, uncle, grandparents and so on. During the COVID-19 and the lockdown period in particular, that was a lot of strain on women. And our 3rd was on loneliness, because we recognise that there are people that are living alone, but there are people who are living alone who have social contact, and that's what keeps them mentally healthy. But then with the lockdowns and so on and the curfews, those opportunities are restricted, and that will have impact on their mental health. So the social and family support that we take for granted was taken away just because of the pandemic.
Yes.
And then the last episode was on domestic violence and mental health. So we talk about how they're 2 sides of one coin, really, that mentally healthy women can have their mental health compromised if they're in a domestically abusive relationship. And if they're not allowed out of the home, they're going to be there with their abuser 24/7. The children also, as Mrs. Christopher pointed out, they're not used to being around each other all the time. They're fighting, they're arguing. There's lots of kind of negative interactions in the home that's happening there too. So yes, we just highlight all those things that are specific to women. That's what the series has been about.
Yes, and that is very good, and that has been very, very comprehensive, because it touched almost on every area where women have been impacted by the pandemic.
Yes, that's been the benefit of us working as a team. The Training and Development Committee, it comprises a number of members of the BPW, and we all pooled our ideas. and considered as wide a perspective as possible about what's happening for women in our federation.
Right. Now, Dr. Gishard Pine, you mentioned something very, very important, that you were driving around the island and you saw this sign where most people might just see it and wouldn't recognize anything about it. It says men at work. I remember some time ago I was editing a press release that one of my information officers wrote, and they kept writing workmen. And I picked it up and I said, why can't you just put worker?
Worker.
Language
Why
is
the emphasis? Because language is
in a home, and people are supposed to assist with these things.
right, and that also highlights the inequalities, no? Even in terms of work. Because is it really fair for a woman to be doing all this housework and the other party, the male, is not assisting?
And on top
There are
of that,
inequalities in terms of that.
and on top of that, you have the issue of domestic violence. You now have all of these fighting with this triple burden, and added to that is the issue of domestic violence. So it's very difficult. It is very difficult for women and men who are raising families, especially alone.
Right. Now, a few years ago, there's a movement that emerged, and they called it the feminist movement. And basically, the feminist movement grew out of the whole thing where women were being oppressed. But there are some people who haven't taken nicely to the feminist movement because they think, oh, women want to be like men. Or these women, they want to exclude men. They've gone to the point where, it's a woman's world. It's a woman's world. In fact, Beyonce had a song, she said, girls, they run the world. Who run the world? Girls. She sang it. And while that might be true to a certain extent, what you want or what you're trying to achieve is not an imbalance. And so therefore, some of the feminist movements perhaps have gone too far in creating an imbalance rather than creating a balance where you have gender equality. What is your opinion on that, Mrs. Warner? In terms of feminism and gender equality, are they the same thing?
No, they're not the same thing, because feminism is mainly concerned with the rights of women, and feminism is the advocacy of women's rights on the grounds of equality of the sexes. However, gender equality is concerned with the rights of everyone, irrespective of gender. And gender equality basically is the state in which access to rights or opportunities are unaffected by gender.
Right, so they're not the same thing.
They're not the same.
Feminism basically looks at women's issues.
Yes.
While what we're talking here in terms of
And all of that. But they all are interrelated.
everything is interrelated.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now we are going to go to the phone lines and to hear what people have to say. The numbers to call are 1-718-577-2916. That's the international number. And the local number is 465-2555. I repeat those numbers. The international number is 1-718-577-2916. And the local number 465-2555. We welcome your calls. Right. Now, Mrs. Warner, who are some of the key stakeholders that have input in this gender policy?
There's an agency in that ministry, the Child Protection Services. When something like that happens and it is reported to the ministry gather the information and whatever else they have to do, and they move the case. If it's a situation where the law has been broken, they are not policemen, they are not enforcers in terms of policing, So they will refer the matter to the Special Victims Unit. What goes on from there, we still have to wait. But then, I sought to wear two hats, because from the Department of Gender Affairs, we have to ensure, especially girls, that they continue their education, and these sorts of things are barriers to them continuing their education. So I'll wait a little while to see what's happening, and if nothing is happening, then I allow the persons who are responsible and heading these things and wait to see what is happening. But you cannot wait forever, because there need to be action on this thing. And someone asked me the other day how many cases of sexual violence we have against children. I don't have that figure here in front of me, but I know that we have quite a bit.
Yeah, it's a very serious matter. Mrs. Warner, we were talking about the stakeholders that have an input in the policy. How have they been engaged? What has been their response, their feedback?
Alright, okay.
Because the policy has to be multi-sectoral.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In the first phase of the gender policy, in 2019, the policy was launched in November 2018. There were a number of focus groups. The consultant met with various NGOs, the public sector, the private sector, youth, faith-based organisations, single parents groups, etc. There were almost 20 focus groups that took place, and it's important to meet with the various sectors to take into account their needs, their experiences. As we know, there is gender inequality. There are different needs for the various genders. So it's important with policy and programs to take into account their needs, and in order to look at what is required to bring in on board equity and equality, to ensure that those groups have equal access and can participate fully in society.
Mm-hmm.
You see, policies that affects people's lives, you must have consultation. I believe in consultation. And so when we set out on the first phase of the policy, that was to cover a lot of groundwork with regards to the NGOs, the private sector, some public sector, because we had trained quite a bit of focal points in those sectors.
Mm-hmm.
And so you had to respect the views of those different groups, because they speak on behalf of people and so on. We had all that consultation going on. So the first part covered all of those consultation. Now the second part of the policy is going to be focusing on the oversight bodies, the government itself, the cabinet, to get the response to what we're going to be doing with regards to these things, because here's where the policies, and that's at the level where the policies and programs, and not programs, legislation and all of that. So there is where we are at with the second part of this thing, because we want to get a wide views of a wide cross-section of people, because these are things that are going to affect your life from birth to death, especially if they become legislation. And once they've been enacted, yes, they can be amended, but sometimes it takes a while to get them amended. So we have to make sure that we capture the relevant information in this policy.
So what is the timeline for the completion of the policy? Because it would have to go to cabinet for cabinet's blessing, and then the subsequent laying of it in parliament.
Well, the official closing date for the policy is December 31st, 2021. So obviously we are hoping to get the policy prepared and ready by November of this year for onward transmission for the necessary approvals.
Okay, right. Now we spoke about domestic violence and how it entails, how we negotiate power, and it's really an abuse of power. That is what it is. It's really an abuse of power. And abusing someone who you perceive to be more vulnerable than you are, or keeping someone or putting someone in his or her place. Control. What really can be done in our society, especially for our young people, in terms of the proper exercise of power and how they must treat others perceived to be even more vulnerable than they are? Because there's a lot of violence that goes on. You hear people calling people names. You hear all kinds of things. There's no tolerance. There's no compassion. There's no respect. And these are the fundamental values, really, that if they're not there, they lead to behavior like that. Dr. Gisha, what's your opinion?
I think there has to be a cultural shift. I think you're asking about here in St Kitts and Nevis. There has to be
It's global.
a major cultural shift. And it has to involve, as I say, the whole full scope of society. Churches, we all have to begin to walk the talk. You know, just saying, oh, I believe this, or people should do that, is insufficient to make those changes. We have not any evidence whatsoever that just talking about this or telling people what to do or referring people to this book or that book creates any lasting change, creates a healthier society, creates more wholesome relationships between males and females or partners of any description.
Yes.
So, you know, I said before that I think I'm a psychologist by training,
Yes.
so I think we try to look for simple answers to complex problems. If we just do that, it will be okay. If we had more women in parliament, or if we had more women managers, or if we had more money in the house, then none of that is true. It really is a very complex and vast subject, and I think I get a sense that we're quite research averse here. And St Kitts, we don't feel, maybe Nevis too, doing lots of research and finding out what is really going on from a scientific point of view, a social scientific point of view. And I think from my point of view, that is the sort of information I would want to work with to take things forward. I hear anecdotes every day. I hear about abuse every day. I hear about child molestation every day. But I hear about complaints that people are not imprisoned. I hear about complaints that people aren't arrested. I hear about people being parents being paid off. These are all anecdotal information that has not led to any lasting change. So we need to do something different. As psychologists, we say, you cannot do the same things and expect a different outcome. We have to do something different if we want to get a different outcome. So that is what I would say. I think we need to look at every element of society and begin to take it seriously and begin to walk the talk. Stop just telling people what they should do and actually live what we know is the best thing for children, which is children's rights, the best thing for women and men, which are human rights. We just need to do it now and stop just talking. But from my point of view as a social scientist, the research is really important. I wouldn't prescribe just doing something based on a story here and a story there. I think we really need to commit to some hard research and really find out what's going on in the Federation to make those changes.
Yes.
With regards to the domestic violence, there are a number of things that we put in place to address the issue of domestic violence. For example, there's the issue of, we have legislation to deal with that. We have a domestic violence protocol, a policy. We also have services, and we have legal aid for those women who, I think it's the minimum wage, who work for the minimum wage, then that service is available to them, as well as maybe, I'm not sure, other people. But there's one thing that keeps eluding us all the time, is the establishment of getting safe houses up and running. Because it is no point We say we have all of these things, and when a woman sharp running for her life, we take that woman and put them, or the child, and put them right back in the same situation because there's nowhere for them to go. I must say, some of the churches have come forward, but as Professor Gishard said, it must be an all of society approach. Everybody has to do their bit in order to stamp out this thing. We may not totally stamp it out, but at least we can begin to see some decreases in it. Right, presently, from where I sit, the issue of the safe house is an acute one. People come to that ministry almost on a weekly basis, trying to find somewhere to go. And it breaks my heart that I don't have anywhere to send them, because we work with some churches and they will do a little thing, and it's just a few of them. Although we have so many churches in the country, we have a number of churches in the country, and I'm sure they all get benefits from government. But it's just a few churches that will come forward to house them, but they only house them for a short while. And then once that time that they give them has been up, no, they don't have anywhere to go. They move right back in the same situation, and it continues. And my greatest fear is that if we keep sending it back, we are perpetuating the situation where there could be deaths. It could lead to deaths. So we got to take this issue of domestic violence seriously. We have never done.
Got a call.
Yes, working for you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Working for you. We lost that call.
We have. I have not seen. I'm not aware of anything that was done in terms of doing a costing on one case of domestic violence. I have looked at the Canadian thing, and I'm telling you, it's not just about giving them housing. It's all of the agencies that are bound up in one case of domestic violence. So for every single case that we have. Okay.
Working for you. Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. I was just passing. I happen to hear a little piece of the conversation. I think even though the pastors or the church members might try to house some of the children, young people are not easy to deal with, you know. Sometimes they do so many wrong things that, you know, I think people will like to assist more, but I think they're just looking down the road. Because as I say, young people are not easy, and some of them after that time they start getting big. They say, "You're not my parents, you can't tell me what to do," and da-da-da-da-da-da. And, you know, people have rules in their homes, eh? So I think people really like to assist more, but I think it's the attitude of the young people. But
you know, what she's saying really makes sense, and we have to be real because that happens. You're looking for foster care parents for these children, and the biggest issue they have comes from the fact that the socialization of these children lead to so many problems. I mean, you put a child into a foster care home, and in about a couple of weeks or maybe a couple of months, they have created so many problems in the home that, I mean, I'm in my home and I'm comfortable, and I insert somebody insert somebody into my home. My whole peace of mind, you have mental issues and all sorts of things. So it is not easy. But despite that, we have to house these people. It's either you house them or you want to...
Working for you. Good afternoon. Working for you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Williams.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Miss Christopher.
Good afternoon.
I want to commend you, because you look like you're a very dedicated woman, and you're an outspoken woman when it comes around domestic violence against whether woman, child, man, or whosoever. You understand? And I always commend you for that. You speak the truth. Now, Miss Christopher, call to that last caller, the female caller. She's all right. Some of these young people set in their ways. You can't get them control home. You put them in a foster care home or whatsoever. They're still going down the road. Sometimes you got to involve the police. You understand? Just to get them control, involve the army. And nobody wants to see that people take advantage of everybody's children. So I do not know if that the government could be, look how they got the thing over. What they call the place over there again? Street about here?
The Horizons.
The Horizon Home, yeah.
Rehabilitation Center.
Because sometimes they go in the Horizon Home and they still come back out worse. Because I know some young men was over there and they come back out. And when they come back out, They're just the same thing. They gain nothing. So I just want, somebody with some kind of experience and some kind of real tongue to thing, and really come and try to mold and to make these young men and women to understand that it ain't that way they're supposed to go down. You understand? I mean, sometimes you try very hard. And, these young men still come out, get themselves involved, get in trouble, go to jail and all these kind of things, maybe getting gun violence and all. Because I'm made to understand these two young men where they died the other day. They was in the pastor home. Anyway, good program as usual. Anyway, continue to uplift the nation and educate the nation about,
Right. Thank you so much
Okay then, Mr. William, you take care.
for your input. Okay.
You see, the issue of parenting is something that must be looked at seriously, because we need to have a national parenting program. You cannot afford to have parents bring these children into the world and abdicate their responsibilities by giving them off to people. Oh, I can't deal with this. I can't deal with this child. I mean, the child was raised in a home. You are part of that problem, and you need to take responsibility. So you find, because of the socialization, these children just go from home to home, and it is high time that the court begin to hold parents accountable.
Yes.
You can't just fend off your problems. Oh, the child is out of control, and so I can't do nothing about 13, 14-year-old. You need to have that child, and the same way the child get out of control under your responsibility, you need to work with it to help bring it back into control. Not just throw the children to somebody else and you go merrily along. Then you get another one to replace that one, and you end up with the same problem, and you come back running because they can't control this one either. It's high time that we get a national parenting program, and that the court begin to hold parents fully accountable for their children.
Yes, parenting has a ripple effect, and there are also ripple effects, I believe, to domestic violence.
Yes.
And when children grow up in homes where there's violence, they in turn learn that this is how you deal with certain situations, through violent means, and they themselves become violent.
And the cycle continues.
And the cycle really continues. And sometimes when you see children that are acting out, it's because of their experience.
Absolutely.
Yes, we are focusing on the behavior of the children. We blame everybody else, the church, the school, everybody else, but we would not put the blame at the home where it belongs. Because everything that starts with a child starts in that home.
That is correct. And we know that there are many influences. For example, they have their peers, and so on. But really and truly, it goes right back to the home. How that child has been socialized. What is really happening in that home? How do the children see their mother and father behaving towards each other? Is everything an argument? Is everything a fight? And then, the sick patterns emerge. Because then a child really learns that what is love?
They live what they
love is arguing, love is cussing, as they say, and love is fighting, and love is that really love?
But most of those parents have a history as well. We have to remember it starts. It's
intergenerational.
It's intergenerational.
When a child is born through their mother, they cry, but they're very calm and serene. So for a child to become violent, destructive, all of those things, something must have happened in their life.
Something must have happened.
Something must have happened to make them that way.
Let me tell you of an incident that I saw. I was driving along the road by NHC, and there were these children coming from school. And they were in their uniforms and so on, and I saw the crowd, so I pulled over on the side and I got out to see what was happening. And there was a young guy there, and he was arguing with this other one. And the children surround them and they're egging them on and so on. And I heard when he swore about 4 or 5 in decent language.
Mm-hmm.
So I said to him, come here, and he came over. I said, why are you using those words? You should not be using those words. And I'm talking to him. And you know what he told me, and till this day I would never forget. He said, Miss, I try everything, and the only language he understands is some bad word. But he was trying to get an earphone from him. And when he swear the bad word, the guy actually threw, because he was telling him what he's going to do with him in the colorful language. And he actually threw the thing over to him. And the children started laughing because he said, I beg, I complained to the teacher, I asked people to talk to him, and he would not listen. And he realized now the only way he can reach him is by doing that. And that is terrible for our society. If the only thing that children could understand is the swearing, because it tells me that children live what they learn, and that is exactly what they play out in their lives.
Yes, and if somebody can only react to you when they have been abused, then something is wrong. It shouldn't have to reach to the point where I have to abuse you to get a reaction from you.
Sure.
I should be able to ask you for something and you politely give it to me if I deserve it, and if it's, you know, rather than having to reach to a stage where I have to nail you to the wall, use profanities and all of that just to get you to react.
And I believe children behaving the way they are behaving, as Professor Jones said, there are things in their lives that have them so angry. Because children, they're born with a clean slate. So how do you get right? So how do you get from being like that to becoming a criminal? Along the continuum of life, there are things that happen that turn the child into a criminal.
That is correct.
And maybe because we, as a society, we have not addressed it.
Yeah. Somebody is responsible. Ultimately, people have to take personal responsibility. But at the very same time, somebody is responsible in terms of the socializing, the monitoring, the shaping of that young person. That's what I believe. And when it's too far gone, when the ship has sailed, or when the horse is already bolted the gate, sometimes it is very hard to get that horse back. And sometimes that is basically what we are seeing. And then you say, oh, I cannot control this child, I cannot rule this child, and you know, children ruling their parents and controlling their parents, something has to be wrong with that. It means that there's some level that they've lost respect. You know? Mrs. Warner, before we leave, and then Mrs. Christopher, because we are basically out of time, you are going to have a ceremony in which you award women.
Yes.
The International Women's Day ceremony. What are some of the categories in which you are going to award women? Because I take it that women, we are seeing the leadership of women and women's organization, their skills, knowledge, and networks that has led effectively in terms of the COVID-19 response and recovery. For example, here in our federation, we have leading that the CMO, Dr. Hazel Laws, she's a woman.
Yes.
And we have other women on the front lines who are working, a lot of our nurses and so on in the healthcare professionals.
We have been focusing on a couple of areas, such as governance and democracy in political decision making. We still have a long way to go. We have a few women who's in parliament, but that is not enough. And just being in parliament, we want to make sure the women have place in parliament, that they represent our interests as women, and well, they're there for other reasons and so on, but that's why women support them and so on. Then you have gender-based violence, which is what we just discussed, and the spin-off from the gender-based violence. We have community service, building partnerships, medicine, and education. These are the areas. We have reduced the areas because of COVID. Things are rough, so we can, the funding and so on is not as forthcoming as we used to have it. So those are the areas that we'll be awarding women in this year.
Okay. Right, and
I want to talk about, you see, we still put in gender-based violence. Although we have legal aid, there are some lawyers out there, there are some female lawyers who do a lot of pro bono service. And I should not be singling out anybody because there's some of them, but I want to single out Marissa Hobson. She's one of those persons that we can call at a moment's notice if we have a case and we needed to just speed up to get to court.
Right.
She's one of those persons.
Yeah, she's to be
And
commended.
and she is to be commended because she really works with us and the vulnerable women in that area.
Now, Mrs. Warner, before we leave, I want you to tell me what are the legs upon which this national gender policy stand? If you had to say what legs, what pillars it stands on, what are they?
Could you rephrase the question?
Not quite clear on the question.
Slightly.
The question is, you have a national policy when drafting. There must be certain pillars upon which the foundation of it is laid. What are those pillars?
Right. Well, the Federation has signed up to a number of conventions and policies which speak to human rights. For example, we have CEDAW, which is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. We have the Bellum du Paro. We have various human rights declarations, etc. that, because the Federation has signed up to, there is a responsibility for implementing the clauses of those federations, and the gender policy will take into account those principles and those pillars, really.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. And Dr. Professor Gishard Pine, your closing words?
Well, just thank you, really. I'm grateful and really appreciative of the Department of Gender Affairs for supporting the docu-series. We have other sponsors as well, and we're very grateful that they had the foresight to support our docu-series.
Right. Okay, so I want to thank all three of you for Miss Wigley, not Miss Wigley, Mrs. Christopher.
Before we leave though, I want to wish all of the women out there happy International Women's Day when it comes. We're not going to be here until after International Women's Day.
That is March 8th.
Right, we're going to come back. But I want to wish them happy International Women's Day.
And likewise, I will do the same and wishing all women and girls, happy International Day on the 8th of March. I think you do tremendous work in our society, and your work should be really valued and recognized. Thank you very much to all three of you, Mrs. Christopher, Director in the Department of Gender Affairs, Professor Gishard Pine, the impact of COVID-19 on women's lives. I would like to have a discussion with you and hear a little bit more about your career. You spend a lot of time in the UK,
Yes.
and so on, and you would have been a professor to university and all of that.
Yes.
Quite interesting. And Mrs. Warner, Executive Officer at the Department of Gender Affairs, I thank all of you for coming and sharing today on such important topic, that of gender equality and that of how women have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, and how we must bring awareness to that and to try to see how we can assist in that regard. Thank you very much. You have been listening to another edition of Working For You. I want to thank all of our listeners and our callers to today's program. Next week we will be back with another Working For You program. Until then, I am Les Roy Williams. Take care and please get vaccinated.
You're listening to our